Secretary of State Marco Rubio says peace talks between Hamas and Israel are making progress, but the war in Gaza is not yet over. On Meet the Press, he confirmed Hamas has accepted President Trump's hostage release framework, with negotiations continuing in Cairo today. Both sides agree Hamas will not govern Gaza under Trump's 20-point peace plan backed by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Trump posted on social media yesterday that talks have been successful, quote, very successful, but warned that delays could bring massive bloodshed. Despite ongoing negotiations, Israeli airstrikes killed 65 people in Gaza over the weekend, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Axios has new reporting on President Trump's phone call on Friday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It came after Hamas initially agreed to release all the hostages. Axios reporting that Trump called Netanyahu to discuss what he saw as good news. But according to a U.S. official, Netanyahu felt differently, telling Trump this is nothing to celebrate and that it doesn't mean anything. Trump then reportedly fired back, "I don't know why you're always so effing negative. This is a win. Take it."
And that, of course, reported by a reporter for Axios who talks to Donald Trump regularly, almost every day. You get a sense almost that it was Donald Trump who reported. We don't know this, but this is somebody with ties to the White House. And it lines up with my reporting, too, that we've been talking about, a growing impatience with Netanyahu. So given a deal here, Richard, where basically there's been shuttle diplomacy back and forth. Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff going back and forth since UN week, trying to get this thing done. And they just looked at each other and basically said to Qatar, the Qataris, we have your back. You take care of Hamas. We're going to take care of Israel. And here we are.
I think the stars are aligning, not for peace, but as you said, Joe, correctly, for a breakthrough. I think there's a pretty good chance now, which is not something we would have said any time over the last 2 years, for a deal, hostage for prisoners, a ceasefire. Israelis pull back to some still to be determined line. I think, there's probably some more aid going in. I think there's a pretty good chance we get that. The rest of the deal, will you eliminate Hamas? No. Will you get every Hamas fighter to give up his weapons? No. No way to do that. No way to monitor that. Will you get serious peace talks underway? No. But could you get a kind of mini deal? I think there's a pretty good chance. And then I think the next big thing will probably be Israeli elections sometime in the first 3-4 months of next year. And Bibi Netanyahu, who was really forced by Donald Trump to accept this deal, will basically try to make it his own and basically say, first I won the war, then I got this breakthrough and I got the hostages.
Well, that's what was so fascinating. Netanyahu at first pushing back. Then after he saw that Donald Trump had cornered him, and that's what the administration said, we got him cornered. Told me this weekend, we have him cornered. And after cornering Netanyahu starts bragging about his peace deal. So that's a good sign.
100%. But Donald Trump, particularly after the Iran attacks, is by far the most popular politician in Israel. And just given the whole backdrop of U.S. aid and so forth, I think Bibi Netanyahu, in a funny sort of way, finally met someone who plays the same game that Bibi Netanyahu plays.
Right. So David Ignatius, it's very interesting. A lot of people reporting that this week that really the breakthrough actually was Netanyahu's mistake of attacking Qatar. And when that happened, that gave Donald Trump the leverage he needed to go to the Qataris and say, we're going to protect you guys. And in return for protecting you guys, this is what we need you to say to Hamas. And again, the conditions that Hamas, we talked about this on Friday, have accepted, amount basically to a surrender, don't they?
They do, although, as we're discovering today, the details of that surrender are still unresolved and are difficult. Exactly how Hamas will be disarmed in the end is up to the Hamas fighters in the field in Gaza. It's not up to the negotiators who've been meeting with Qatari and Egyptian diplomats outside of Gaza. And similarly, the details of Israeli troop withdrawal, what percentage of Israelis will withdraw, where will they withdraw from, the fine points that really are decisive in the end in getting a peace deal that lasts are still outstanding. There's a big group meeting in Cairo today to try to resolve those issues. To me, Joe, the situation was summed up well by Israeli columnist Nahum Barnea, well known in Israel and to Americans who follow the Middle East, who said Trump doesn't make threats to Bibi, he gives him orders. And that's the way it's looked, I think, in recent days. Trump has been the dominant figure in these negotiations. And as we've seen, Netanyahu has really no choice but to at least nominally go along, as has Hamas. Hamas has nominally said, we're on board. But we'll see today in Cairo just how difficult some of the remaining details are.
Well, and the devil, Jonathan's always in the details. Marco Rubio yesterday saying, I think it was on Face the Nation, hey, we don't have peace yet. This is where the negotiations come through. And again, that shuttle diplomacy, Kushner, Witkoff, the Americans, Israelis, everybody there. What is so fascinating, though, this time is you usually have Israel isolated in the world now. You know, when Hamas was trying to figure out whether to do this or not, you had the European allies first saying, we support this deal. Then you had Arab countries saying, we support this deal. Hamas really has nowhere to go here.
Yeah, there's such widespread public pressure. Take this deal. And there's a sense, I talked to some White House folks over the weekend as well. They do think like Netanyahu overplayed his hand. The strike in Doha, certainly. Also, word had gotten back to the White House that Netanyahu was telling allies in the region that he was giving orders to Trump, that he was in charge, and the president would have to follow his lead. Yeah. You can imagine how well that sat behind the Resolute desk. So there's been a change here where Trump and his team have really feel like they've been able to put the screws a little bit to Netanyahu. They forced the apology in Doha, and now they feel like they're close to getting Netanyahu to take this deal. I'm struck by the language we heard from the weekend of Trump telling Netanyahu to take the win. That's the exact phrase that President Biden gave Netanyahu more than a year ago, October 2024. Right around this time, Netanyahu defied Biden then. Richard, he seems like he's not able to now. Now, we know the president, look, he's overstating things on social media in terms of where this is. That is his want. The Secretary of State, I think, more reasonable in terms of where things actually are. So walk us through, in your estimation, where some tripwires could still be, because we've been close before, and something always seems to go wrong.
I think the tripwires are how much of this overall 20 points you try to get accomplished in order to get the first few points implemented. And that's always the challenge, Jonathan, in a negotiation. Are you willing to separate out the first few points, the hostage return, the prisoner release, ceasefire, Israeli pullback, which I think is all doable, from basically the next 15 points? If you basically say everything has to be agreed to and implemented, or begun to be before anything to be implemented, this thing is still.
Well, we've got to figure out, what does the Arab peacekeeping force look like? What are the conditions on the ground that have to be met first before, like you said, we go to those next steps that will determine how Gaza looks over the next 5 years.
But you don't have to do that now, Joe. My point is simply that I think you almost want to separate this into two packages, a kind of mini package on this initial exchange and ceasefire, and then all the more far-reaching, ambitious stuff, including the ultimate negotiations about peace. So my guess is you carve a small deal, and I think that can happen. And the only thing I disagree with, I think for Hamas, it's really an interesting situation. They're being pressured by the local population to agree and the Arab countries. My guess is Hamas will agree to this. But it doesn't mean they've surrendered. Let me just I think Hamas can survive, if you will, to fight, figuratively and literally, another day. You can't get rid of them. They'll blend into the population. They will hide weapons. So I think what will happen is we'll get through this, but it doesn't mean that we've in any way resolved many of the basics of Gaza, much less the larger Palestinian issue. But what Donald Trump wants, if you will, is this win. He wants to get this breakthrough, which is an important breakthrough.
Get the hostages home.
Get the hostages back.
That's a huge
and
win.
get a ceasefire. That's an enormous accomplishment. Yeah. It's not the same as everything, but it's something.
Yeah. You know, Mika, over the weekend, the Washington Post released a poll that showed we're talking about the pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu for possibly overreaching. Washington Post poll that I've never seen anything like it in America. Just stark disagreement with Netanyahu and Israel on their policies from Jewish Americans. The numbers are staggering.
and they play a role in this. In a minute, we're going to speak to a former Middle East negotiator who's worked for presidents on both sides of the aisle, has many insights onto the different angles into this problem. But